All right, Rami, it's great to have you here, and it's cool. We met on Exmuslim, but I understand there's
Subreddit.
an interesting background there, which I'm very curious to unpack. And I'll say that you're actually the first Muslim person or ex-Muslim I've been interviewing for this show, and there's a lot less that I know than, let's say, Christian. Growing up Jewish, there was more exposure to Christianity, I would say broadly. So I think at the very least I'm going to learn a lot along the way.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm not so sure you'll learn the kind of things that maybe people would expect listening to this. I actually don't know a lot about Islam,
Okay.
um, and I mean compared to imagine ex-Muslims that grew up in a very heavy Islamic environment, and I didn't. I
Okay.
was born and raised in Los Angeles, California, USA. My parents, Muslims, but I don't think they knew very much.
Okay.
Okay, so and like there wasn't a lot around me. We didn't have a lot of friends that were Muslims. It was
Right.
mostly American culture that I was getting, and Arab culture, not necessarily Islamic.
Right. Right. Which I'm sure many people lacking nuance probably equate the two, is my guess. Similar to people find out that Jews can be more or less religious, right? And that also, if they're completely outside it all, that can be surprising to them. There's Jewish culture and then there's Jewish religion, right? And
Yeah,
then those
and you'll find Arab Christians that, in a lot of ways, are pretty much the same as Arab Muslims.
right.
And then I do think there's significant differences, and I would say it's better on the Christian side.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're taking a stance here, which I would love to unpack more, that there of the different religions, on top of a culture, there are some that are better than others.
Oh
Um,
yeah, I'm not the type to say all religions are the same. They do have
perfect.
some aspects that are the same, but if you consider all of it, yeah, they're all
Right.
different. Um, and I would say Islam is the worst one,
Okay. Fair enough.
significantly.
Fair enough. I'm happy to explore that further. So I'm curious how you end up in a place where, um, again, I knowing very little and deliberately like rolling backwards, you did not grow up particularly religious, and yet you are on ex-Muslim, right? As very active there. You found me there. What calls you to hang out in those circles?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I noticed that myself, that a lot of the people there in the ex-Muslim subreddit are there because they had heavy negative consequences of being raised the way they were, which is usually just more religious than anything I experienced. And
Right.
that's partly why they're there. They're more affected by it. For
Yeah.
me, why was I there? That might be hard to explain, but I would try to do it quick. So when I became an ex-Muslim 14 years ago, part of it was I had just separated from my mother of my two kids, and then at the same time quickly realizing that now I'm really going to be the parent raising the children. And I before that I had the Arab conception that the mother raises the children and the father brings the money.
Okay.
But I found out that really it's going to be me, without getting into details of why that is the case.
Yeah.
And that was shocking for me. I remember having a panic attack related to it. I remember having a nightmare of my she was 4 at the time, my oldest daughter. I remember having a nightmare that she was in her 20s asking me, like, why I ruined her life.
Mm.
And so right after that, I went searching. I remember thinking I have to rethink everything. And I mean, the aspect of I just became an ex-Muslim. A lot of these beliefs I had, I just got rid of. I have to rethink everything. And I tried to do that, but you can't. You have a lot of beliefs that you don't even know you have. So first you have to reveal them.
Yeah,
And that's very difficult. I'm 14 years in. I'm sure I still have some stuff I haven't thought of or questioned. I'm sure I have, let me say it this way. I've been saying it like this recently. I have propaganda statements in my head that I'm not aware are propaganda,
I love
regardless
that.
of where they're coming from. Some of it's from American sources, some of it is Russian sources, some of it is obviously the Islamic stuff, Arab stuff. Anyway, I'm going to try not to lose track of what I was saying here. Why I was in the ex-Muslim subreddit. So 14 years ago, when I became an ex-Muslim, I was searching for philosophy, and I found a philosophy book, The Beginning of Infinity by David Deutsch.
Okay.
And there was a community around it. And, that's kind of new, where you could find a book and then find an online place where those people are talking. And, I mean, that sort of, and this is what year was this? This is 2011, 2010. And it wasn't new to the whole world, but it was new to me to do online discussion. And I branched out from there and went to other places. I was searching all over the internet for places I could have discussions, And one of the areas or topics that I was focused on was Islam, but the philosophical side of things, theological side of things, not family issues, not psychological issues. And the places that I was doing it, I found out later that the ex-Muslim subreddit existed at the time, I think. But I didn't know of it, and I wasn't even on Reddit till like another 10 years later. I was finding these weird, obscure websites that had little forums for people to discuss on. So I guess the answer to your question of why I ended up in the ex-Muslim subreddit, I mean, I was talking everywhere about everything.
Okay.
And then that was just one of them. Here's one thing I noticed. I found that the ex-Muslims, compared to the other audiences I was engaging with, were more open-minded.
Okay.
And I have a theory about, so it was more fun to engage with them than all the other places.
Okay.
They would listen more than the other places. And I think it's because we came out of the worst cult. So we're more ready to question our beliefs. That's my theory about why I found that to be the case, and then I enjoyed being in that place and talking with people. So I hope I
Yeah.
answered your question.
No, that was great. That's such a great intro. Of course, I've got 10 more questions from that, but this is exactly the point.
Yeah, yeah,
I find it fascinating. It's a bit, I more and more as I interview more people, wondering about a bit of that chicken and the egg kind of concept around the openness. Is it that the people who are inherently open eventually leave religion because they can't tolerate this kind of closeness? Or does leaving something where you've already experienced that everything you thought was true might be wrong means you're definitely open for that being happening again, and you approach everything with more caution? It's probably a combination of both, as usual, the nurture versus nature kind of thing. But I definitely agree with you.
I think
People
that's
who
a
grow,
very first of all, I've never thought about it much or any, so I'd have to put some thought into it. But my guess is, like a lot of chicken and egg things, it's a cycle contributing to each other. Each side is contributing to each other. You said openness. What do you mean by openness? You mean like being willing to talk about my past?
no, you the specific point you made at the end that the ex-Muslims were more open-minded as a community
Open-minded.
with other people. Yes, open-minded. Yeah.
Well, yeah, like if you were raised, if you think of all the people being raised in a family as a Muslim, the ones that are more open-minded to begin with, the family and then the person who's being raised in it, yeah, they're more likely to then find out it's nonsense,
Mhm.
and then that little step makes it more likely that they'll be open-minded to new ideas after that. Yeah. And that this gets into, we're not all the same. not all the Islamic families are the same. I kind of used to think that, and I even thought of it afterwards too. I mean, it's a little bit of how do I say this? Like a psychology effect. I remember, before you learned that other people are different than you, you just assumed they're like you.
Right.
6 years old, I remember thinking stuff like that, and then the the more advanced you get in things, the more you realize, yeah, we're so different from each other. Still some similarities, of course, but
Yeah.
um, the differences are huge, and it's hard to grasp how big it is until you really get a lot of experience seeing a lot of different people. A
Exactly.
lot of
Yeah.
it, a lot of it, and I am sure I have more path to go in that to see
For
them
sure.
different.
Yeah. So let's take a step back, and this I think is the key, the crux of a lot of this conversation is you simultaneously feel that you were not raised particularly um, Muslim, and at the same time you definitely have like a defining moment where you left um, Islam, and you describe it that way. So what was that journey for you of okay, there was something and now I'm not that anymore.
Yeah, sure. So that's a big topic, but I guess I should give the context of what I think today about why I was still a Muslim at that moment.
Okay,
Okay.
what that even means, yeah.
Well, let me go back to the beginning. Everyone who's a Muslim from the beginning, if you could ask them, why do you believe in Islam? Their answer is, my parents told me. Their answer isn't, here's this logical argument I have, or you know,
Of course, especially if you're born into it and whatever it is, that's going
right.
to be
I'm
the
only speaking about people born into it. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
And then after that, I don't think anyone really has a conscious memory of how they changed their reasoning from my parents told me to whatever else they landed on.
Okay.
And then they find out that's nonsense and they find another one reasoning
Mhm.
for why they're still a Muslim. Okay, I remember what my last one was.
Your
And it
reasoning.
was,
Okay, the last thing that kept you a Muslim until you stopped. Okay.
yes. And it was, let me just describe it philosophically. I thought religion was for morality. Morality, you have to have religion,
Right.
which is really ridiculous.
It's a classic one though.
Yeah, yeah, and coupled with the Arab/Islamic conception that the mother raises the children. Well, how are you going to get your children to be moral beings? You need a person. It's got to be the woman who knows Islam better than I do. Let's say. I forgot where I was going with this. Oh yeah, why I left. So I ended up marrying a woman from born and raised in Syria
Okay.
because she knows Islam better than I do. And then, and because she was born and raised in Syria, I don't know if this is obvious to you or the audience, but being born and raised in the West, you adopt a lot of the cultural aspects that being born and raised in the Islamic country is like opposite. So, as an example, in the U.S., the concept of believing in, let's say, demons or jinn, in Arabic they call them jinn, it's laughable here. There are still some people who believe that kind of stuff here in the West, but it's laughable. Like it's very common to not believe in that stuff and to think it's stupid. And I think it's because of like the Enlightenment from 500 years ago, that did that. And the Arab world didn't get it. It's extremely common to believe in jinn over there. So this woman I married was one of those type. And I guess I should say this little, I was aware of the demon concept or jinn concept in Islam, but there was something that my grandfather told me many years earlier that I I think I used to twist something. He told me the Quran is written for stupid people and smart people. And the smart people have to read between the lines, and the stupid people can't. I think one of the things I did using that logic was to take the concept of jinn and say, oh, that's symbolism. But that only works if there's no humans who actually believe in jinn. Because if there are people that believe in jinn because of Islam, then this symbolism thing doesn't help them. It's not helping them. It's making it worse.
Right.
It's making them dumber. So the mother of my kids believed she was possessed by jinn. Well, we had already separated first, and then I found out about this. But realizing that there's people that believe in jinn is what got me out. Because that's batshit crazy.
Okay.
It was ruining her life instead of... So let me make it more clear. I saw Islam as a set of rules that you can follow that makes your life better. Apparently, that's not true, because this person was following Islam more than previously, doing things like, she was going to exorcists. That's following Islam. I don't think they call them exorcists. I don't know what they call them. Somebody that's supposed to be able to take out the jinn from you.
Yeah.
And she was putting these Quran verses printed on a page and all around the house. Somehow it defends you from, like pushes the jinn away or something. That's not making your life better. And let me say it this way. She should have been going to a hospital, but instead she was going to an exorcist. That doesn't make your life better. That makes your life worse. That's when I left and realized it's all nonsense. So I think that's it.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So one level deeper, and again, you'll excuse my ignorance on really, really basic questions.
Yeah.
So one way that I could ask this is, what, again, if somebody who was raised not particularly religious, it sounds to me, what I'm piecing together here, is that to be Muslim to some degree is an identity. I am a Muslim, and then the Islam as a religion is happy with you because you have that statement about yourself, and then you could revoke that statement in a way, is what I'm understanding. I'm curious, is that true? Was there any other evidence-based or indication, like a practicality, to when you were still Muslim and when you decided you weren't anymore? What changed on a classic religious, if you will, level for you?
I'm not sure I understand what you're saying. I think you're asking, like, what other things about the religion did I disagree with?
No,
No?
and less philosophical to start with, because we could obviously,
Okay.
I think we're in a lot of alignment about, why people would leave a religion.
Yeah.
But I'm curious what that, if you're not, you define yourself as not being raised very religious, but still there was a point where you said, I am not Muslim. Is Muslim, and again, this is based on almost zero knowledge, is Muslim a lot about that statement? Is it
I
a
see what
big
you're
deal
saying.
to get up and say, no, I'm not Muslim anymore?
My guess is, well, first of all, there's as many versions of Islam as there are Muslims.
Okay.
I say that about every religion. I even say it about the concept of love. There is as many conceptions of love as there are human beings that care about love. Okay,
Right.
so but then you can get more specific, like actual sex with established belief systems within Islam, and there are differences there. But what I remember, and if you want to talk about which sect I'm from, it's the Sunni one, the major one.
Okay.
Supposedly 80% of Muslims are Sunni. What I remember was something like the way you become a Muslim, and I guess this is if you're not born to it. You just say that what's called the Shahada, which means it's witnessing. You say there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his messenger. Once you say that, you're a Muslim. What does it take to get out of Islam? I guess if you, I'm not really sure, but I guess if you say that Allah is not God, or if Muhammad is not the messenger, I mean, you're contradicting that statement. I think you should ask a scholar about this. But to me,
For
that's
sure.
all meaningless, because as soon as you stop believing in God, that's what should do it.
Okay, so there was the point where you stopped believing in God. That's how you define it primarily.
Uh I see what you're asking. First, I'll say this: it wasn't on my mind very much.
Okay.
I didn't care about it. I was watching. What I saw was crazy behavior, and that's what I was focused on. And I think what happened was when I finally came around again to thinking about religion and God, I was like, oh, this is all retarded.
Okay.
Um, although there's people that try to keep the belief in God but get rid of religion. I wasn't one of those because I'm more like, well, it's a whole package theory. So
Yeah.
you find out it's wrong, the whole theory's gone. Somebody else can present another theory to me that has a part in it that says there's God, but I haven't seen one that makes sense to me. I'm
Right.
open to it. I'm still open to that, by the way. Somebody come argue to me that there's a God, I'll listen, but I haven't seen one that's any good.
Right. So what I'm hearing is at the time there was actually a lot of interpersonal craziness, for lack of a better word, that
It
you were
was.
dealing with, and theology had to take second place as you navigated a divorce and the meaning of what it looks like to raise a family. Then it's a lot of times, almost like afterwards, when you unpack what went on there, there was a loss of faith, a lack of belief in God. I'm curious, was there much practice in your life with I guess if you froze a frame, a random day in the life of Rami, freeze frame before and after, was there evidence, if you will, of religion to some degree in your life before, as far as practice or
Oh,
thought, requirements by
yeah,
religion?
I'll say what my view of that was and still is really. Well, let me say what it wasn't. I hear a lot of people say, and this is after the fact, I hear a lot of people say things like, I felt connected to God. Or they say, I was a Muslim, but I never felt connected to Allah.
Okay,
I never at once even had that thought. I
okay,
didn't think about, am I feeling connected to God? To me, that wasn't a thing. By the same logic, I also never thought about spirituality. I think that's what that's about.
okay,
What the connection I had to God was so my whole life I was really interested in like physics, chemistry, biology. I got a degree in physics. And I was a Muslim all the way through that and then another 10 years still. And I remember thinking, this world is so crazy advanced and complicated. There's no way a God didn't make it. Something like that, you know?
okay, yeah,
And today I still have, uh, I don't know if empathy is the right word. I sort of still have sympathy with that argument
yeah,
that there's people who believe in God because they kind of, and I'm not saying I'm representing their position very well, or even my old one, but like there needs to be a creator that have made all this because it's just so perfectly designed. Um, I don't believe that anymore, but I think it's very easy to fall into that, and it's not that outrageous to think otherwise. I don't know if I'm making my good point here, but
No, I completely understand. It sounds like for you it was a bit more of an intellectual experience. It wasn't about the interpersonal connection or spirituality or emotional connection, which it is for some people, but there was a real intellectual sense of like this is the framework that keeps it all together, and it's God. And I'm curious for you, did this manifest in your day to day? Was it more of an abstract, okay, this is how it all fits together in the back of your mind, or was there practice or tradition or things that you did as part of that belief at the time?
so I want to explain the I guess what they call the metaphysics and then the morality. So on the metaphysics side, it's um let's see. I just had a brain fart. Let me talk about the morality first, then,
Yes.
and I'll hopefully remember the other one. So let me describe some of it, my perspective or my old perspective with some events that happened when I was young. So I remember I was 16 years old, and there was a 20-year-old Muslim with me. We were talking about something, And now that I think of it, I don't know if he was trying to test me to see what things are like in my head, but I remember him saying something like, "You see that phone over there? Why don't you take it?" or something like that. "Why don't you steal it? Like, what's stopping you from stealing it?" I think that's what he was saying. And I don't remember my answer, but then he said, "Well, no one's watching you. No one's going to see." And I remember getting angry and saying, "I'm going to see." What's interesting now to me is that I didn't say God is going to see. And I noticed he also didn't mention that God's going to see. We're both Muslims. Neither of us mentioned God is going to see. He saw it as, well, no one's going to see except for you, and that doesn't matter. And I saw it as, no, it does matter. I'm seeing it. So you can tell a difference in morality between me and that guy. Another case, same guy. He was talking about sins or whatever, and well, it's okay because then you go to Hajj, which is that pilgrimage once a year that happens in Mecca, and that erases your sins, X number of sins. And I thought that was insane. So you could do the most murderous, evil shit, and then you erase them because you do this stupid thing that doesn't mean anything, and then you get to go to heaven. I thought that was insane. But that is what the religion says. That's where the person got it from. But I also, like, I never took that piece of information and thought, oh, that means Islam is dumb. I more saw it as that person was dumb. But it's the same thing. They got it from the religion. I don't know.
Interesting. Yeah, I like that distinction. We have to psychologically, right? There's been a lot of psychology mentioned today, right? We have to make these to keep our framework of our worldview, which helps us have community and a sense of meaning or safety. We have to make all sorts of loopholes in our mind, and our minds are very good at that, actually. So I'm curious. Another way that I could ask this: most religions have this like actually don't know about Christianity. Judaism certainly does, and there's a lot of influence. There's certain practices, certain laws that are particularly important to the religion. They get all extra wigged about those, right? For Jews, that is Yom Kippur. That's a 1 day of fasting, and then there's Passover, which everyone seems to celebrate, and like Hanukkah. There's a lot of holidays and stuff like that. That's a big one. Then high up is kosher, which would be the equivalent of eating, I guess, halal. Were any of those practices of the Muslim equivalent in your life before? Did you stop afterwards? I'm curious if there was any transition around that.
Well, I think along the same lines of you said I cared about the intellectual side of things, and not the spiritual things. I didn't care about rules. Okay, here, let me say it this way. Kind of changing the subject, but it comes around. I remember reading in the Quran. I was with my wife. We're reading in the Quran, and I remember reading, a good Muslim is a Muslim that fears God and hell. And I remember thinking and saying out loud, wait, I don't fear hell or God. And I said, what's up with that? How do we reconcile that? And I remember looking at my wife's face, and she had this blank look on her face, and she didn't say anything. Much later, I was trying, after becoming ex-Muslim and many, many years later, I was trying to figure out why I was that way, because I found out other people are different. There's people who fear hell, even though they're ex-Muslims now, they're still fearing hell. What I realized about my past self was that, I believed I was going to heaven because I'm doing the good things. I don't murder. I don't rape. I don't steal. I don't fraud. I have good manners, although a lot of people disagree. That's how you get to heaven. It's simple. It's a really easy formula. I think the people who are indoctrinated more into Islam, they have this, and this is explained in Islam. We don't know the formula, and only God knows, and it's still up to his whim. So I guess that's why they're scared. And I didn't have that. I saw it as, well, there's a formula and I know what it is and I don't need God's help. Or like he's not going to go against his own rules. Obviously. To me, that's obvious. And anyway.
That's fascinating. Yeah. The way fundamentalist Judaism and Christianity get you to fear hell permanently is by getting more and more nuanced. So they'll be like, oh, it's not just murder. Come on, that's too easy. So they'll come up with a million tiny laws that you could very easily mess up all throughout the day. And that's where they get you because you're so consumed with the details that like you're 90% righteous and 2% evil, and that's where we don't know the formula exactly. How does each one weigh against the other? Where am I going to end up? That
And I
is
broke
oftentimes
those rules all the time. Like, as an example, masturbation.
right.
I don't remember ever having a thought that, oh no, I'm committing a sin. Or I also didn't feel shame. I mean, people will feel shame about that even if they weren't in a religion. So that's a small one. Another small one, I guess, eating pork. I remember eating pork a couple times. I didn't feel like, oh no, this is a sin. I know it's a sin, but I didn't think that a couple of sins here and there means you go to hell.
Right, right, exactly, and to me that speaks to a very. I have not interviewed many reform or conservative Jews, for example. That's the example. But then you probably have more liberal Christians as well who I haven't spoken to. The fascinating thing about them is it's almost like religion doesn't go as deep, right? It's like a thing that you do. It's part of your life, but that kind of really pervasive, coloring every aspect of your day. That somehow seems to be the result, and you could probably maybe think of your ex-wife as an example of that really deeply ingrained religious upbringing. So people could still be Jewish, let's say, but it doesn't feel, they're like, oh, this is a really nice thing. It makes sense. And, you might decide that it's not a nice thing anymore. And it's somewhat of an more arbitrary movement in and out. I'm curious for you, for example, were there any practices that you did do at the time? Like I know for a lot of Muslims, even the ones who seem quite secular, like let's say the woman isn't wearing a hijab, which I always thought was pretty important. They still a lot of times, for example, fast Ramadan. Was that ever a thing for you, fasting
Yeah,
Ramadan?
I fasted, but there were, in a month of 30 days, maybe I miss 5 of them, and I didn't see that as a problem. So what? I
Okay,
missed a few of them.
right,
I
right,
remember thinking something like, "You're trying to do good, but of course you're not going to be perfect."
right.
Isn't it very? I'm trying to remember. It's hard to remember, by the way, because I feel like White Gandolf and Grey Gandolf. I barely remember him.
Mhm.
Um, it clearly says we're not perfect, doesn't it? It's, all the religions say we're not perfect. We make mistakes, so obviously some mistakes should be okay. I don't know.
Right.
That's
Right. No,
all.
I love it. I love it. So, what would you say? I'm running with your metaphor, which is I love it. Is the difference broadly in how you live your life or how you experience the world between Gray Gandalf and White Gandalf? What was that thing that, in a way, you let go of? We could describe it that way.
I'm not sure what you're asking. You're kind of asking what changed from the 14-year period of right before I became an ex-Muslim to 14 years later, how I am now. That's
In
a
a
lot of
way,
changes, but
yeah, not yeah, like if snapshots in time, you don't have to describe the journey, but in very broad
oh,
strokes,
what
you now
is
have the
Rami
world
like when he was 31 versus what am I like now? Well,
from a specific lens. Yeah, from
I'll
the
tell you,
lens
my
of
daughter asked me this question a little bit,
yes.
like a month ago. She's 15, and I think she was asking about people in general, but she also wanted to know about herself. And the way I answered was, well, there's some things about me that are the same now from when I was 3, which explains how I got here to where I am. And I remember things about me when I was, well, here's something. I don't know if this has any value. I'm just going to say it. You guys can judge for yourselves. My mother told me in the first month of my life, I didn't smile. And my eyes were bug-eyed huge, intently looking at everything. And she says the reason she knows this is she didn't find out I have a dimple till 1 month old. Okay, so she saw me as a serious person. Everyone says that about me now. Not to say that I don't make jokes or whatever. I think I can do that better than most people. So I can be very serious and I can be very jokey and I can mix them too. But yeah, I've always been a very serious person. I don't know if that means anything. And
Right.
that's from my first month of life that my mom's talking about. When I was 3, it was the first time that I met my grandfather. My family went to Syria for a visit. And there's this story that happened, which was, so first a little bit about my grandfather. Very tall, very big, very he was a soldier, he was a colonel in the army. Very, when he wants to discipline, he's violent. Very scary man. People were scared of him. His soldiers were scared of him. Okay, he's
It's the
used
U.S.
to,
Army, by the way.
huh?
Which army? Which military?
Syrian,
Syrian military. Okay.
Syrian. Um, Even his soldiers were scared of him. Okay, everyone, he's used to people being scared of him, intimidated by him. So I think he assumed a 3-year-old would also be, and I wasn't. So like, I was sitting in a chair watching cartoons, and the story goes, he comes over and says, "Hey, that's my chair. Go to another chair." And I was telling him, "No, I'm sitting here. I'm watching TV. You go sit over there." I was telling him what to do. And he saw that as, I'm like an individualist, a thinker, stuff like that. And all whatever he saw in me is still the same today. What things are different? What's different is stuff like, oh, here, I'll tell you a big one. I don't know how much related this is to do with leaving Islam, though, but I'm sure it is. Because you remember, I thought that thing, I have to rethink everything. So the way I was before, I cared a lot about rationality, rational, logical. Let me tell you a little bit about the journey, I guess, to tell you where I ended up. There were 2 occasions in the past few years where I was speaking with a woman. In the 2 cases, one time it was my aunt, and another time was a girlfriend. And we had these 2 almost the same discussions, which was, the woman said, "You know what I like about you?" And they wanted to say one feature. And I wanted to answer for myself first. I said, "I'm rational." And they said, "No." I said, "Okay, what is it?" "You're loving." And I'm like, "What? I don't understand that at all." Because I didn't see that about myself. I was wrong. They were right. I didn't understand. Now I think I understand. To explain what it is I understand, that's a big topic, but that's a big difference. I started a group called Love and Reason. I put love in the front. I put reason second. How I was before, only reason.
Right. Right.
Big difference, I think. I don't think people will understand what I just said unless they really understand my, I guess, new worldview and how love fits into it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Interesting.
guys, if you want to know, go find my YouTube and start looking for stuff like that. I have a lot.
Yeah. So yeah, let's elaborate on that. First of all, how can people find your YouTube? And I think you mentioned you have a podcast too.
Yeah, so that's the same thing. My YouTube and my podcast. It's part of a nonprofit. I'll say that first. The nonprofit is for the purpose of ridding the world of apostasy laws, like the death penalty for leaving your religion.
Okay.
And I call that a love issue. It's also a reason issue, obviously. It's a love issue. It's what humanitarians care about. Okay. And part of that is, it needs an engine to spread the word. So that's why I made a YouTube. And the name is called Uniting the Cults. The name of the nonprofit and the YouTube and the podcast.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Uniting the cults, yeah. And even how that name came out has an interesting story, but a little bit wider than just ridding the world of apostasy laws. It's helping Muslims, or helping people before and after leaving Islam, doubting Muslims, and then after leaving Islam, they still have a lot of trouble. I think I have a unique way of helping them that a lot of people don't have.
Okay. Okay.
And then more generally, it's not just getting rid of the apostasy laws. It's also just all the values that are common in the West, like freedom, respect of the individuals as opposed to standard collectivism, love, reason, those things, they need to spread everywhere. And that's part of what I'm trying to do with this nonprofit.
Okay. So let's unpack that further. And starting with apostasy laws, and then you mentioned death penalty. Um, those are all somewhat foreign to me. Generally speaking, would people leave or don't leave Christianity or Judaism? They leave, and the repercussions are usually social. They're like, oh, all their friends stop talking to them, or and obviously internal repercussions on their worldview. But like society, that's the extent of it. So are you referring to apostasy laws around Islam? Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so in the Quran, and going on 1400 years, people have been following this rule of when somebody leaves Islam, kill them. And today, the way it manifests is there's like 10 plus countries, Muslim majority countries, that have a law of the death penalty for leaving your religion. They'll get more specific and they'll say things like, well, if you left your religion in your heart and you don't say it to anyone, that doesn't count. It has to be you're exposing it. And then some of them go further and say, well, it has to be that you're actually trying to convert people away from Islam. And all of this is meaningless because all I'm trying to do is save other people from the suffering that I had. I don't even, like, you can stay a Muslim, I don't care. I want Muslims to join Uniting the Cults. I want Muslims to join us to be against apostasy laws. It would be better if Muslims joined too, like it's not going to work if it's just ex-Muslims. And it's not going to work if it doesn't include all the other countries. US, UK, all of them. Like all of them need to care about it and want it. A little bit similar to, just go back 100 years and there was a lot of countries still participating in slavery. I think it's outlawed everywhere now, but probably still happens with government sanction in some places in like say far away from cities maybe. And sorry, I forgot where I was going with that.
Yeah, no, this is great. So I wanted to hone in on a specific thing you mentioned almost in passing, called the suffering that I had. Can you talk for a moment about the suffering that you had seemingly while Muslim, that I guess at least you were freed of when you left, at the very least?
So as far as I know, I didn't have any until I got married to the woman who, brought Islam. Like I brought Islam into my house. That version of Islam in her.
Okay.
Not the version that my parents gave me,
Okay.
which I don't think I had any suffering from. Or maybe I did, but it was very small type of things, Like if you could say, I was with my friends and I couldn't eat pork. Let's say that was suffering. I don't know. But that's nothing, meaningless. People have way worse stuff that have nothing to do with religion in that realm. The suffering from my wife, I don't think there was really any during the marriage. But then when we separated, I haven't explained any of this yet, but I guess I'm going to blame some of this on Islam. The way she treated me after we separated, I've never been treated that way from anyone. It was very confusing to me that somebody would treat me this way. She was very mean. She would say nasty things, all false things. And I think she was doing it to manipulate me. And obviously, I'm pretty sure there's people that do this that didn't get it from any religion. But I think Islam tells people to do this kind of stuff. For one thing, it tells you to lie to advance Islam. It's such a broad thing that you can use it on anything. So, as an example, there was some context first. There was a 2-year period where the mother of my kids was beating my kids, and I didn't know. When I finally found out, it was one of my kids having the courage to tell me about it. And I asked her, why didn't you tell me before? Why did you hide it for 2 years? And what she said was, well, Mama told me I'll go to hell. Well, that's not what Islam says. She was lying, which Islam tells her to do. She was lying to, the way she saw it, promote Islam. And it kind of did, in a sense, because it meant my children weren't telling me various things that if they were telling me, then there would be some dialogue and they would, unindoctrinate themselves with that dialogue. So I would say the suffering is what my kids faced. I got some suffering too, because like my suffering was hurting because my kids are hurting.
For sure.
And I think an additional element, which was, I was supposed to protect them and I couldn't.
Yeah, it's a big one to watch people suffer at the hands of religion, the general, the helplessness around that. So, what I was going to ask you, my two main follow-up questions for you for now. This is very broad in what you spoke about very early on, is just because it's fascinating to me. What is it that you feel that is more dangerous or harmful about Islam than other religions, as somebody who has more perspective on it?
Well, for one thing is the death penalty. Now, people will criticize my position by saying, well, Judaism has the death penalty. Okay, but when I say Islam and Judaism, I mean it in the sense of the way the ideas exist in the minds of people today. I don't care about what's written in a book a long time ago. There's no religious Jews that want the death penalty today. Maybe they wanted that 3,000 years ago, or 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. So other than the death penalty, I think it's hard for me to answer that, because I don't know. For one thing, I don't know how bad Islam is, because I got a very light version of it. I don't know that much about the other religions. Like recently, I've been learning about Mormonism, and I learned some things about that, and I see how it is, at least on some levels, as bad as Islam. And I wasn't aware of any of that. So, yeah, I don't know.
That's fair. No, that makes sense. Um, the thing about death penalty, it's in Judaism, two things I would say that redeem Judaism, and I'm not a big fan, but there is no penalty for any sort of thought or most statements. The death penalty, you hear about it for idol worship, which is very specific actions. You would have to like be bowing down to an idol, and then typically that's what causes death penalty originally. I do believe that there are sects of Judaism that would like to, for the Messiah to come and everything will be restored to its full glory, which includes something that looks closer to Sharia law from an Orthodox Jewish perspective. And in that place, there would probably be death penalty again, at least on paper. At least they've never theologically unpacked how it would be different. So they seem to be really obsessed with things being the same. And the main distinction is that it would be more for things like stoning gays, things like that. I think would be the easier target would be sexual immorality and things like that. Judaism actually has more reasons to die around sexual impropriety than it does around more theological stuff, because idol worship, something that has gone out of style, it's not as big a risk as it used to be. So a bit of an aside there from the little area that I am more knowledgeable
Well,
in.
just to add to that and to address the previous question a little bit more, the ways in which Islam is worse or suffer causing than other religions. A big part of the difference is the current state of the culture of that country.
Yes. Yes.
And then even within that, there's subcultures, even like down to the level of a family. So like my parents are from Syria, but I'm pretty sure they were like the top 5% liberal, reasonable. Like my grandmother was a teacher and she was like the first female teacher, at least in that generation kind of thing. My grandfather was a lawyer. So they were, on the high end of that area. And then I think, so coming here to the US, that put us still in, let's say, top 25%. But yeah, there's people like my ex-wife's family. That must have been a lot worse. I heard from her how she was raised. It was things like she was locked up in a room for a year as a teenager for the purpose of I don't remember. She must have done something wrong, but she told me that the main purpose was to be there so she could teach and tutor her brother so her brother could do well in school. None of it was about, hey, you should do well in school. Anyway,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
a misogyny thing. Islam is causing it, but it's also older than Islam, and the whole world has. I don't think there's a place in the world that doesn't have some misogyny.
Right. It's very, it's been around for thousands of years.
Yeah.
And it's a, like, those, as you said, the propaganda slogans that need to be identified and dealt with. And I don't know if we even know exactly always how to do that. If we were to expand, you said the concept of helping people before and after leaving Islam and the unique way that you help them. Can you speak more to that? I'm curious at this point what it is that you feel you're, I guess, turning around, if you will, and giving back to others.
So what I'm giving them is the stuff I've been learning for 14 years about philosophy. And why it's different than what everyone else is doing. The standard thing that I see from everyone else is, and I'll just give one example to illustrate all of it. People will come into the ex-Muslim subreddit and say, hey, I'm an ex-Muslim, but I still sometimes, like when I hear some new miracle claim, I think, what if I'm wrong about Islam? And then they have a panic attack. And the standard reply from ex-Muslims is to engage with them about that particular miracle claim, the details of it. And I think that's helpful on some level, but it's on the level of, and I give a metaphor for this now. If there's a child who's having some anxiety and fear, and then they suck their thumb and it relieves it, that's good. But hey, you need to evolve to something better than that. And that's what I've been telling people. And the evolution here is you need to learn some logic that would get you out of even giving a flying fuck about a new miracle claim. Because they're all stupid, even before considering the details. You need some scientific thinking. I'm trying to teach scientific thinking.
Okay.
I use the word philosophy, but in my understanding of things, philosophy and science are the same thing, just given a different name by different people. Mm-hmm. If to give everyone an example of something like this, just naming issues, the first physicist that we know that we call a physicist is Isaac Newton. But in that time, the term physicist didn't exist. He was called a natural philosopher. He's a philosopher that focuses on stuff related to nature. It's so I used to say philosophy first, science second. Now I say they're the same. Because here's one way to explain it. If there's any philosopher who's ignoring some of the stuff from that scientists came up with, so he's anti-science, that's a bad philosopher. If there's any scientist who's ignoring some of the stuff that philosophers came up with, and I mean the true things, obviously, I mean the true things, then that's not a good scientist either. That's an anti-philosophy scientist. You need to get the best ideas from invented by scientists, and I mean methodological ideas, ideas about how to judge ideas and how to create ideas. You need the best of these ideas from any field, regardless of what field it came from. Could be theology. Think of there being a menu of things you can adopt in the realm of religion or competing with the religion. So on my menu was Islam. I was born and raised in the US, so really on the menu should have been Christianity too, but I think the way I was seeing things was that really wasn't on the menu. What should have also been on the menu, and I blame school for this, is things like general things like, okay, so theology is competing with philosophy. In theology, they're talking about morality. Well, philosophy talks about morality. Theology is just philosophy with there's also a God. If during school, we should have been taught philosophy. That was the standard education for people in the West, at least for parents that had enough money to hire the right tutor. That was the standard education for people in the West going back to ancient Greece. Philosophy was the most important part. It was called the classical education. Every great thinker we know of went and did this classical education. Philosophy was the biggest part. You learn philosophy first, so you learn how to think, and then they give you physics, chemistry, biology, and everything else, and you're using your philosophy to judge those things. More accurate words I would use is epistemology, the study of knowledge, and morality, the study of how to live. People have different definitions. Metaphysics or whatever. I just care about epistemology and morality. If that was being taught to me in school, like people were getting prior to 150 years ago in the US, I think I would have left Islam way earlier. Because I would have seen it on the menu. And I would have seen, hey, at least consider it.
Yes.
The menu has nothing on it right now. Like if you're going through school and you just got your Muslim parents, people don't know about all this, I'm going to call it ancient knowledge that is very valuable.
Right.
You know, stuff Socrates said, very valuable today. There's a thing that we have in the West, maybe the whole world has it, maybe it's more so the West, is if it's old, it's junk. And even in ideas, you know, I remember talking to someone about some stuff that Thomas said. He was a psychiatrist. He was criticizing some of the standard practices in the field of psychiatry, sorry. And because I was talking to a person about this, and she didn't agree with the ideas that Thomas said. But when she found out that I was speaking about someone that wrote a book 30 years ago, she was like, oh, that's a 30-year-old book. That's wrong now. We have newer books. It's not wrong just because it's old. But that's very common for Westerners to think that way. I'm not really sure how they got it. Maybe it's sort of I think it's something that was sort of be born out of the trajectory we've had over the past 500 years of there's so much new information, new knowledge, new technology, new everything. And if you just look back 100 years, it's so different than today. It just looks stupid to us today because they're on horses and they didn't fly to the moon, and you know. But if you just imagine what it's going to be like in 1,000 years, pretty sure we're still going to be accelerating even more. Like we're not going to decelerate. I don't think. Like either we're going to kill ourselves, or we're going to die from a meteor, or we're going to be continuing to accelerate. So what is the world going to look like in 1,000 years? I don't know, but I think we'll be getting away from the idea that old is bad. Or I'm wrong, and oh man, it's going to be really bad if we don't get that right.
I hear that. And the school, just to clarify, you went to a school that was a secular, it was a public school system in the United States?
American public schools. There was one year in fourth grade that I was in a private school, Islamic private school in Los Angeles.
Okay.
And then one year, the following year, in Syria, in a school called Icarda, which was a European school that was connected to agricultural research. And I think it was just for the students of the employees that came from Europe.
Yeah.
So there weren't any Syrians there except for me.
Right.
And by the way, that was my best year. Of all my schooling, that was the best one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Maybe more European influences and stuff. But 100%, right? Like, if Western society fails people on the critical thinking front, and then those people get sucked into a cult of some kind, it's a failure of Western society for being too liberal towards cults in general, which I think is a general flaw, or specifically around not giving you the alternative, as you described it, right? You mentioned for you, a lot of it was around morality and how do I be a good person, or the theology of the framework in which you're in. And for that to be like optional as something you maybe sometimes get a bachelor's in, and that's about it, is absolutely, I would say, a failure.
I'd like to say something about what you just said. Karl Popper, he's known as a philosopher of science or epistemologist. I'm just going to call him a scientist. This was maybe 70 years ago or something. He said this thing that was coined as the paradox of intolerance. And it goes like this. If we're tolerant to intolerance, that just breeds more intolerance. We need to be intolerant of intolerance. And this is how you get the basic concept of like self-defense. And it also goes along with this. When you hear people say, we can't have infinite freedom or infinite peace. If somebody comes to try to kill me, I'm not going to give him the freedom to do that. I'm going to stop him. So that's where the line is. And then same for peace. If somebody starts a war, we need to do war to stop the war and bring peace back. In the West today, the standard thing we're doing is we're being tolerant to intolerance. And if we want to give it a name, it used to go by the name multiculturalism, where they would do things like they would try to have this conception of every culture is equal, which is also like saying, if you do think religion is bad, every religion is the same level of bad. And that has bloomed into a lot of things, and now we call it wokeism, which I think is only happening because these people didn't learn philosophy in school.
Yes, so wokeism. That's what you were saying there, and I agree with you 100%. In fact, I think it gets worse. Again, I generally, this podcast is overall not a philosophical or abstract one, but if we're on the topic, there is actually similar to old is bad, but then you get niche is good, right? Niche is good. The more alternative you are to how I am, the more exotic and amazing you must be. So if we're Western, and then you're coming from this exotic Muslim background, right? Then you must actually have like deep wisdom in your past that the West and capitalism can only, dream of, and so there's this constant idealization of the other, and that the other is full of shit a lot of the times, right? And there is no discernment around just because I am powerful, right? The power things, Oh, I'm privileged. I'm powerful. Yeah, but maybe you're also right, And maybe it's the lack. Maybe when you're looking at someone who's not privileged and not powered, this is very non-PC to say. Some of that is circumstance, but some of that is the circumstance of them being raised in an extremely non-empowering society, right? You're privileged because you're a woman and you were raised in a place that actually gives you full rights. And these are people who are coming from a place where they're forced to wear hijab, and I'm sorry, that is not an equal right. Okay, um, adults can do what they want, but if you're raising kids that way, yeah, you're setting them up for a ton of suffering and pain and handicaps. We
So
could go
as you
on.
said that, three ideas popped in my head, and now they're all jumbled.
Yeah.
um, the last of the three was, I don't know why this even came in my head now, but something recent I even said on the Exmuslim subreddit just today or yesterday. Like if we say women are not as smart as men, a lot of people freak out about that, but women are causing it in the sense that mothers speak to their daughters in a certain way. Like, for example, I was saying this. I remember, so I have two daughters, no boys. I'm taking my kids to school. This is like over 10 years ago. And the first thing that is said by a female teacher as they're coming out of the car, "Oh, hello, Mina and Lulu. You guys are so beautiful." And I'm like, they're smart. And what do they do to boys? They say to boys, "You're so smart." They don't say you're so handsome. Or if they do, it's not as much. So we're training boys to 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 value intelligence in themselves, and we're training women, girls, to value beauty and not intelligence. And more so, I remember hearing this too, that mothers will tell their daughters, "Hey, don't get too smart because boys won't like you." And they say the opposite to the boys. So if there is a net effect at the end of all this that women are not as smart as men, it is only because they are causing it during the upbringing. It could disappear, but it hasn't disappeared yet. And then you get into pockets where it's even worse. Islam makes women dumb more so than non-Islam because it goes very aggressive. I don't know if you know this kind of stuff, but it's very standard in Islamic or Arab culture to let your boys leave the house and do things, roam around in the city with their friends and whatever else, or even a job. And don't let your daughters do it. Daughters stay home. So the boys end up with these so many opportunities to learn from the outside world, gain wisdom and experience, and the girls not. And then at the end of all that, years and years and years of boys and girls doing that, and then if you were to ask or notice, oh, look, on average, the boys are more capable and the girls less so. Oh, look, girls need boys to take care of them. You guys caused that, and it could be fixed very easily. Incorrect to say it's easy, I guess, but in my view, it is easy. I mean, because I kind of started that way with my kids. I never had that because I was raised in the U.S. I never had and because of my mom. Okay, so my mom was told by her dad. This is that soldier guy I was telling you about. Her dad said to her, because he had 3 daughters and a son, he told his daughters, "Look, you guys all have a penis." I'm not sure about the way he worded it, but the concept was you're the same as men. And they grew up believing that mostly, I think. So they ingrained that into me. And it was easy. I got something different from my dad, but it was easy to easy is not the right word either, but like what I was getting from my mom was in agreement with what I was getting from American culture. Even though American culture really wasn't caught up yet, and there's still some misogyny in it, but I think it's getting better. Like I think now in college, it's a little bit more women than men. Where if you go back to when I was young, I'm pretty sure it's way more men than women.
100%. I will say I would like to see more women in science and STEM specifically. There's a lot of overrepresentation of women in the liberal arts and underrepresentation thing. And I think that's one area
Well,
where A, there's a lot of money there, and B, that the intellectual style of
well, I'm going to argue against that real quick. So
okay.
Jordan Peterson talks about this a little bit. He saw the studies about. So there's not a lot of areas where you can see uh, this being tested, but in Europe, I don't remember which countries, maybe Sweden or something, where they actually tried to provide an environment that allows women to go to school just as much as men, and they overwhelmingly willingly choose fields that are not STEM. The women do, and the men continuing to now. Part of that is the culture doesn't change very fast. It might need 1,000 years to change it. Yeah, it's kind of just culture. The thing I was saying earlier about love and reason, I was telling you, I'm a man raised by people that are trying to make me a man, the way they saw men, masculine, you know. And when I would ask myself about, you know, what is my main feature, I would say reason, but the women said love. They're being raised differently to care about things differently. I think they're right. Or you could say it this way: we're both partially right, and the correct solution is to get the best of both sides. That's why I say love and reason. I mean, I didn't reject reason. I didn't throw it away when I
Right.
realized the importance of love.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. So again, if people want to check you out, Uniting the Cults, where you talk more about um, love and reason. And I want to just give you an opportunity if you have any questions for me. That's usually the tradition in which I.
Oh man, I would have a million questions. I don't know that I can think of any now. It's more like I have comments I'd like you to comment on.
I can comment
um,
on, and actually before I do that, I realized this question. You are extremely knowledgeable, especially in the area of philosophy. What are some resources you would recommend to anybody leaving religion? I know you've already spoken a lot about this. So the specific resources that you would send people.
so I recommend that everyone, and this is everyone, regardless of where you're coming from, Islam or not, every human being, at least today, until there's a better book, read The Beginning of Infinity by David Deutsch.
Okay.
Or maybe something even higher than that, I would put above it, is there's this parenting philosophy called Taking Children Seriously, made by Sarah Fitzclarridge. She's writing a book. It's not done yet. So when the book is ready, I would point people to that. Right now, it's a website and a bunch of essays and her on Twitter and a lot of posts on her Twitter. She was actually working with David Deutsch on it too. The same guy who wrote The Beginning of Infinity. In my daughter's words, she said, me learning that philosophy was the thing that helped our relationship more than anything. I guess I should give a little bit of rundown of what it is.
Okay.
Um, so it's not extremely new or like, you know, made up recently. There's people going back 200 years that said things that were compatible with this philosophy, taking children seriously. You know, where you're respecting children as full human beings like any other human beings.
Yeah.
But I guess what is new from 200 years ago is a lot of help in really making a full package philosophy, instead of like what existed 200 years ago was more like this pretty awesome philosopher that talked about 1,000 things, and there was this one little area, not even in a chapter about parenting, where he mentions some parenting concepts. This is full package parenting, and it's heavy on the philosophy side of things, epistemology, the study of knowledge. You're not. It's very clearly saying, look, parenting is education. That's a big role that parents have to do for their kids. Whether you believe that or not, it is happening. You're educating your kids. And if you don't understand how learning works, then you're going to get it wrong. So it explains how learning works. Well, that means you have to understand that's the topic there is epistemology. The field is epistemology. But I want to give a word of caution to people. Don't just look for ideas that claim to be epistemology. That's a mistake. I would use different words. The scientific approach, that is epistemology. So you need to look it, and an even more broad way to say it. Learn ideas about how to judge ideas from any field, regardless of what field they claim they're coming from. So you shouldn't be somebody like this. There are people like this. Suppose I'm a physicist, and then somebody who claims to be a philosopher says, hey, I have this great idea. Everyone should use it. And the physicist says, no, I'm going to ignore you because you claim to be an epistemologist, not a physicist. That's effectively what a lot of people are doing. That is like what a cult does. Look how I'm bringing it down. I'm calling. So in some ways, the group of people that call themselves physicists, some of them are doing cult behaviors. Same with chemists, biologists, and every other group of people. So it's not just the religions. So
Yes.
as an example, so people don't think I'm crazy, even Richard Feynman explained some of these things 50 years ago in his speech in 1974, the Caltech commencement speech, 1974. He dedicated the entire speech to this one thing. What he said was, even he even used these words. Even physicists are doing some of these, what he called cargo culting. I'm calling cult behaviors. So, if you imagine all the steps you need to be taken to do science, and then you skip some of them in favor of another goal. Let's say the goal is, hey, we need more funding for our department.
Yeah.
And in order to get more funding for our department, we need more publications. Not more valuable publications. We need more publications. So we can skip some of the science steps. That's what's happening. I'm calling those cult behaviors. Some physicists are doing that. Or maybe not necessarily physicists, but because physicists are working for organizations and people that are not physicists, sometimes they have to just do what the higher ups say. And, it's not so easy to just quit and go get another physics job.
Right, exactly. And I love how that ties it in full circle, right? Where this is more than any one ideology, the identification of a way of thinking that is sorely needed in the world. And that's kind of your passion, is to bring that back. It would have helped you in the past, and it would help a lot of people regardless of where they're coming from, especially if they're, unpacking a worldview that is deeply not against that. And we find it, unfortunately, to some degree or another in the West as well. And so I appreciate the recommendation. Check out Beginning of Infinity.
I'd like to say one more thing. So
Yeah.
a small thing, maybe it's not small. So June 14th, what was that? 2 or 3 months ago? June 14th was the 50th anniversary of that speech by Richard Feynman.
Okay.
I chose that day to be the birth of Uniting the Cults. And I did a 6.5 hour live stream.
Okay.
3 interviews. And it was all about trying to bring back that knowledge from Richard Feynman and others, including David Deutsch, Sarah Fitzclarridge, and a lot of other things, all in one package. If you watch that 6.5 hours, that'll catch you up to like 90% of the stuff I would like to say.
Amazing. It's so
Yeah.
cool that you were able to consolidate it that way.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rami. Yeah, I have a few minutes left if you want me to comment on anything.
Oh, so yeah, my question's for you, I guess. It might be good if you're willing to be on my podcast. I'd like to ask you those questions there. Um,
Absolutely. Let's do
but the
it.
kind of things that I want to talk about are like I'm amazed by the Jewish culture
Okay.
as it exists today, as in Jews. I didn't know this, but when like I have a list of my greatest thinkers, who I think are the greatest thinkers. After the fact, I started looking up what are their ethnic backgrounds. All Jews except for maybe two.
Right.
All
Yeah.
Jewish background.
Yeah.
Richard Feynman, Karl Popper, David Deutsch, Einstein, obviously. Like ones that aren't in there that I can remember. That list is shorter. Socrates
Right.
and Isaac Newton.
Right.
As far as I know, that's the only person on my list of greatest thinkers that doesn't have Jewish ethnic background.
Yes. Yeah. It's fascinating, and the same is true for science, philosophy, psychology is huge with the Jews.
Comedy.
Right. Comedy.
Jerry
Yeah.
Seinfeld.
Exactly. Exactly. I'll make one final point, and then we'll end with this. That similar to how you have Arab culture, and then you have, almost like Islam. I guess this isn't even so relevant. The thing with the word Judaism is it's a couple things at once. It is a religion and it is a culture at the same time. They're like
Two
we don't
separate
even have
things.
words. What?
Two separate things. They
It's
just
two separate
happen to
things,
have the
but
same name.
I think that having a word like Arab and then Muslim and those are separate or together is useful to understand what's going on. So here we have actually there's two broad strokes of Jews. There's Middle Eastern Jews and European Jews, and broadly speaking, and then on top of that, there's religion that some of them keep more, some of them keep less. If you look at all those names that you're dropping, those are European Jews. It's a fascinating thing, and I only bring that up because it's and a lot of them were not religious, right? It's a non-religious European Jews, oftentimes rebelling against their religious counterparts at the time, and going forth into the world. So we can talk a lot about what got Jews there, but it's the fact that it is a subsegment tells you that there's something more going on than just Jews, period, which Jews don't like admitting. I was raised in a place where everybody's like, oh, look at Jews, we're so smart. It's like, not all Jews are so smart. It's Europeans who left religion seem to be the smart ones. So,
Well, we can drill down. I agree with everything you said. We can drill down more and say, well, I can imagine a person of Jewish background in Europe, but from the bottom 1% of families, probably not so great. It's
could
the
be.
top 1% of families producing these people. Like if you go look at from Richard Feynman what his upbringing was like, his dad was amazing.
Yeah.
A big part of it was that family. Um, maybe it's only the top 1% of the European Jews that are producing these greatest
Exactly.
thinkers.
There's a lot of factors behind the scenes. So I would love to continue the conversation if
Yeah,
you
I'd
don't mind.
like to have you on my podcast. One thing I want to ask about is the history of how or whether the Jews learned from the ancient Greeks.
That's a fascinating one. I'm not the biggest expert, and the problem is that nowadays the Judaism that we have now split off around 2,000 years ago and became the predominant one. It's called Rabbinic Judaism, and there was other forms of Judaism that I'm less knowledgeable about because I was raised with that being the only one. But at the time, the Rabbinic Judaism narrative was very exclusionist. It was very us versus them. The strongest force that I know of is Maimonides, who was actually Middle Eastern Jewish. I think he lived in Egypt. He was a philosopher in his own right and quite respected. I think he was court physician in Egypt, but so he included philosophy in a way that hadn't really been done before. So there's Jewish philosophers, and broadly they were very dismissive of uh, the general philosophers. And in fact, early term for apostasy or like being against religion is calling you a philosopher. It was an insult in in the
Wow.
Judaism that I was raised. The classical text that we would read, you'd be like, not don't be one of those philosophers, right? Who can follow their mind and fall off the face of the earth, kind of thing. Don't do that. Follow only Jewish thinking. And in fact, this kind of philosophizing in general was maybe to some degree a modern. So a lot to unpack there. But unfortunately, no. I think there was in religious, the more once you get into religion in any way, it very much
So what
no,
I
no.
was actually asking about was the Jewish culture, which of course is somewhat connected to the religion. But yeah, when I have you on my podcast, I want to ask you deep questions about the history there and how, like, why is it that the European Jews were so different than the Middle Eastern Jews, aside from they grew up in the Enlightenment era in Europe. Aside from
Right, which isn't enough. Which isn't enough. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, exactly. Amazing, Rami. I gotta run.
All
Thank you
right.
so much. This has been great.
Thank you for having me.